Have you ever met someone who was actually good for you, and felt your interest slowly disappear? They text back. They make plans. They communicate clearly. They don't play games. And somehow, that makes you feel restless. At first, everything seems perfect. You feel calm, safe, respected. No confusion. No mixed signals. No emotional roller coaster. And then something strange starts to happen. You stop feeling excited. You stop checking your phone. You stop feeling that rush you used to feel with other people. You start thinking thoughts you don't want to admit. Something is missing. Maybe there's no spark. Maybe the chemistry just isn't there. So you pull away. Slowly. Quietly. And eventually, the relationship ends. Then months later, you find yourself in a new situation, with someone emotionally distant, unpredictable, hard to read, and suddenly the spark is back. The excitement. The obsession. The butterflies. The anxiety. The uncertainty. The emotional highs and lows. And part of you starts wondering, why do I lose interest when things are healthy? Why does calm feel boring? Why does safety feel like something is missing? If this pattern feels familiar, you're not broken. You're not incapable of love. You're not sabotaging your life on purpose. You're following a pattern. And once you understand where that pattern comes from, healthy love starts to feel very different. At first, the relationship feels easy in a way that surprises you. There is no confusion, no guessing games, no long gaps between messages that make you check your phone every few minutes. Plans happen naturally. Conversations flow. You don't feel like you have to prove your worth or earn attention. Things simply move forward without tension. And this is where the confusion begins. Because for most people, this sounds ideal. This is what healthy relationships are supposed to feel like. Calm. Stable. Predictable. Safe. But instead of feeling deeply excited, you feel something quieter. Something harder to describe. You feel calm, but not thrilled. Comfortable, but not obsessed. Interested, but not consumed. And part of you starts wondering if something is wrong. You may notice that you don't think about them constantly the way you used to think about past partners. You don't feel the urge to check your phone every few minutes. You don't replay conversations in your head. You don't feel that intense rush of anticipation before seeing them. Instead, your life continues at its normal pace. You go to work. You see friends. You focus on your hobbies. You sleep normally. You eat normally. You function normally. And this normality feels unfamiliar. Because in previous relationships, normal life did not feel normal. It felt charged. Emotional. Unpredictable. Relationships used to create a constant background buzz in your mind. A sense of urgency. A sense of emotional importance. You used to feel highs and lows. Excitement and anxiety. Hope and doubt. The relationship occupied a large part of your mental space. Now, it doesn't. And the absence of that intensity feels suspicious. You might start thinking things like maybe the chemistry isn't strong enough. Maybe the spark isn't there. Maybe this is more like friendship than romance. These thoughts feel logical. Reasonable. Responsible even. After all, shouldn't romantic love feel exciting? Shouldn't there be passion? Shouldn't there be butterflies? So you start scanning the relationship for signs that something is missing. You notice that conversations feel easy, but not electrifying. You notice that time together feels pleasant, but not overwhelming. You notice that your emotions feel steady instead of intense. And the steadiness begins to feel like a problem. This is the moment when the nervous system starts comparing the present to the past. Past relationships felt intense, emotional, urgent, unpredictable. You felt pulled toward the person strongly. You felt deeply invested early on. You felt the emotional stakes immediately. This relationship feels different. And the difference creates doubt. You may start thinking about past partners more often. Not because you want them back, but because your brain is searching for a familiar emotional reference point. You remember the excitement, the passion, the emotional pull. You remember how strong the feelings felt. And compared to that, this new relationship feels quieter. This comparison can create guilt. Because nothing is objectively wrong. The person is kind, consistent, caring, supportive. They communicate clearly. They treat you well. You know, logically, that this is what people hope to find. So why doesn't it feel the way you expected? This question can feel deeply confusing. You may start blaming yourself. Wondering if you are emotionally unavailable. Wondering if you have commitment issues. Wondering if you are incapable of long-term love. You might talk to friends about it. You might search online. You might try to analyze your feelings repeatedly. But the answer remains unclear. Because the problem is not the relationship. The problem is the emotional template your nervous system learned to recognize as love. And that template was not built on calm. It was built on intensity. And once your brain has learned to associate intensity with romance, calm can feel unfamiliar. Even unsettling. This is where the pattern truly begins to reveal itself. And to understand it, we need to go back to where the emotional template of love was first created. The emotional template of love begins forming long before romantic relationships enter your life. It develops during childhood, inside the earliest experiences of connection, attention, comfort, and emotional closeness. These early experiences quietly teach the nervous system what connection feels like and what emotional states are associated with being close to someone. As children, we don't learn love through words. We learn it through emotional patterns. Through tone of voice, timing of comfort, consistency of attention, and the emotional atmosphere of the home. These experiences become the foundation for how the nervous system later recognizes connection and intimacy. If early connection felt calm, predictable, and emotionally safe, the nervous system learns that closeness feels steady. But for many people, early connection carried a mixture of warmth and uncertainty. Not necessarily because the environment was harmful, but because it was emotionally inconsistent, busy, stressed, or unpredictable in small ways. A caregiver might be loving but overwhelmed. Supportive but distracted. Present but emotionally unavailable at times. Warm one day and stressed the next. Again, these experiences do not need to be dramatic or traumatic. Small patterns repeated over time shape the nervous system more than isolated events. A child might experience moments of deep closeness followed by moments of emotional distance. Moments of comfort followed by moments of distraction. Moments of attention followed by moments of preoccupation. This creates a mixed emotional signal. Connection becomes associated with both warmth and uncertainty. For a child, this uncertainty is confusing but deeply important. Because children depend on caregivers for safety and regulation. When attention feels unpredictable, the nervous system becomes more alert. More attentive. More focused on maintaining connection. The child begins to monitor the emotional environment carefully. They notice changes in mood, changes in tone, changes in availability. They learn to detect subtle emotional shifts quickly. This heightened attention is not a choice. It is a survival strategy. The nervous system learns an important lesson: connection requires vigilance. Instead of experiencing closeness as calm, the child experiences closeness as something that must be maintained, watched, protected, earned. This creates a subtle but powerful emotional association. Love becomes linked with effort, with anticipation, with emotional activation. Moments of connection feel intense because they are not fully predictable. Moments of attention feel exciting because they feel uncertain. Moments of closeness feel meaningful because they feel temporary. The nervous system becomes accustomed to emotional highs and lows within relationships. It learns that connection is something that fluctuates, something that requires attention and effort to sustain. This emotional learning happens quietly and automatically. By the time a person reaches adolescence, the nervous system has already built a template for how connection feels. And that template does not rely on logic. It relies on familiarity. Familiar does not always mean comfortable. Familiar means recognizable. This is why, later in life, the nervous system reacts strongly to emotional patterns that resemble early experiences. When a relationship feels unpredictable, emotionally intense, or uncertain, the nervous system recognizes the pattern. It feels familiar. Familiarity creates attraction, even when the experience is stressful. Uncertainty creates emotional activation. Waiting for replies. Wondering about feelings. Trying to understand mixed signals. These experiences create adrenaline and anticipation. The nervous system becomes alert, focused, and emotionally engaged. This activation is often interpreted as excitement, chemistry, or passion. At the same time, calm and consistent relationships create a very different emotional state. There is no guessing, no monitoring, no waiting, no emotional uncertainty. The nervous system is not activated in the same way. Instead of adrenaline and anticipation, there is steadiness. Instead of urgency, there is predictability. Instead of emotional highs and lows, there is emotional stability. For a nervous system accustomed to activation, this calm can feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel boring. Not because the relationship lacks value, but because the emotional state is different from the one the nervous system learned to associate with connection. This is why healthy relationships can initially feel less exciting. The absence of emotional uncertainty removes the adrenaline that once accompanied closeness. The nervous system interprets the absence of activation as the absence of chemistry. This misinterpretation is powerful. Because it happens automatically. It feels like intuition. It feels like instinct. It feels like truth. You may genuinely believe something is missing. You may genuinely feel less excitement. You may genuinely experience a lack of urgency or emotional pull. But the difference lies in the emotional state, not the quality of the connection. The nervous system is experiencing calm instead of activation. And calm takes time to feel safe when activation has always been familiar. Understanding this shift is the beginning of seeing the pattern clearly. When the nervous system is used to emotional activation, calm does not immediately feel safe. It feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar emotions are often interpreted as wrong emotions. This is why, in healthy relationships, a strange shift can begin to happen after the early excitement fades. The first weeks or months feel easy and pleasant. There is curiosity, attraction, and interest. But as the relationship becomes more stable and predictable, the emotional tone changes. The highs and lows start to disappear. The urgency fades. The emotional intensity settles into consistency. And this is the moment when the mind begins searching for problems. You may notice yourself focusing on small details that previously felt insignificant. The way they laugh. The way they text. Their hobbies. Their habits. Small imperfections begin to feel unusually important. You may start asking yourself quiet questions. Do we have enough in common? Are we really compatible? Is this person exciting enough? Is the chemistry strong enough? These questions feel logical, responsible, mature. After all, choosing a partner is important. It makes sense to evaluate compatibility. But beneath the logic is a deeper emotional shift. Your nervous system is experiencing calm, and calm feels unfamiliar. So the mind searches for a reason to explain the discomfort. It finds small details and turns them into large concerns. This is not because the relationship is wrong. It is because the emotional state is new. When emotional activation disappears, the brain tries to recreate it. Sometimes this happens through doubt. Sometimes through overthinking. Sometimes through emotional distance. You may begin pulling back slightly. Taking longer to respond. Feeling less motivated to make plans. Not because you consciously want to end the relationship, but because the emotional urgency is no longer pushing you forward. Without urgency, connection feels optional instead of necessary. And optional can feel less compelling than urgent. This shift can be confusing because you may still like the person. You enjoy their company. You respect them. You appreciate how they treat you. Yet the emotional pull feels weaker. You might compare this to past relationships that felt more intense. You remember how strong the feelings were. How much you thought about the person. How quickly you became emotionally invested. The comparison creates doubt. Why did past relationships feel stronger? Why did those feelings come more easily? Why does this feel quieter? What often goes unnoticed is that past relationships may have included emotional uncertainty. Waiting for replies. Wondering about feelings. Trying to earn attention. Navigating mixed signals. Those experiences created emotional activation. They kept the nervous system alert and engaged. That engagement felt like passion. Now, without uncertainty, the nervous system is no longer activated in the same way. The emotional quiet feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feelings often trigger the search for explanations. This is where the mind begins telling stories. Maybe the spark is missing. Maybe the chemistry is weak. Maybe this person is not the right match. These stories feel convincing because they match the emotional experience. You genuinely feel less activated. Less consumed. Less urgent. But the absence of urgency does not mean the absence of connection. It means the absence of emotional instability. Over time, this lack of activation can create restlessness. You may feel a subtle desire for excitement. A craving for emotional intensity. A sense that something is missing. This craving can lead to emotional distance. You may become less engaged without understanding why. Conversations feel repetitive. Plans feel routine. The relationship feels predictable. Predictability begins to feel like monotony. And monotony feels incompatible with the idea of romance you learned earlier in life. This is when many people begin to withdraw. Not dramatically, but gradually. Less texting. Less enthusiasm. Less emotional investment. Eventually, the relationship ends quietly, often with the explanation that the spark was missing. And then, months later, the pattern repeats. You meet someone emotionally distant or unpredictable. The emotional activation returns. The excitement returns. The obsession returns. The nervous system recognizes the emotional pattern and responds immediately. The cycle begins again, until the pattern becomes visible. Once this pattern becomes visible, a deeper realization begins to take shape. The issue was never that healthy relationships were boring. The issue was that your nervous system learned to associate emotional intensity with emotional meaning. For years, intensity signaled importance. Uncertainty signaled attraction. Emotional highs and lows signaled connection. Without realizing it, your nervous system began using emotional activation as a measurement of love. This is why calm can feel confusing. Calm does not create urgency. Calm does not create adrenaline. Calm does not demand your attention every moment of the day. Calm does not make you check your phone constantly. Calm does not make you feel emotional extremes. Calm feels quiet, steady, predictable. And if your emotional history equated intensity with love, quiet can feel empty. This creates a powerful internal conflict. Part of you wants stability, safety, emotional reliability. But another part of you feels restless in the absence of emotional activation. This restlessness is often interpreted as lack of chemistry. But what is actually happening is a nervous system adjusting to a new emotional environment. For a long time, emotional activation kept your attention focused on relationships. The uncertainty created anticipation. The unpredictability created emotional investment. You had to think about the relationship constantly because its stability was unclear. Now, stability removes that constant mental focus. The relationship does not require constant monitoring. The emotional stakes do not feel urgent. And without urgency, your attention naturally shifts back to other areas of life. This shift can feel like emotional distance, even though it is actually emotional balance. Instead of occupying your thoughts constantly, the relationship becomes part of your life instead of the center of it. Instead of creating emotional highs and lows, it creates emotional steadiness. But because steadiness is unfamiliar, the brain interprets the quiet as absence. This is why people often say they miss the spark. The spark is often the feeling of emotional activation. The adrenaline. The anticipation. The uncertainty. But adrenaline is not the same as love. Adrenaline prepares the body for action. For focus. For vigilance. It keeps attention locked on the source of uncertainty. Love, in its stable form, does something very different. It reduces vigilance. It reduces monitoring. It allows attention to expand beyond the relationship. Stable love makes space for life. And when your nervous system has spent years equating attention with importance, reduced attention can feel like reduced connection. This misunderstanding is powerful because it feels intuitive. It feels like instinct. It feels like truth. You may genuinely feel less excited, less consumed, less emotionally intense. And because you learn to measure love through intensity, the conclusion feels obvious. Something must be missing. But what is missing is not love. What is missing is emotional instability. Healthy relationships remove the uncertainty that once fueled emotional activation. They remove the unpredictability that once created urgency. They remove the inconsistency that once triggered anticipation. And when those elements disappear, the nervous system has to learn a new emotional language. A language where calm equals safety. where predictability equals trust, where steadiness equals security. This learning takes time. At first, calm feels unfamiliar. Then it feels neutral. Eventually, it begins to feel safe. And safety creates a different kind of emotional experience. One that is less intense but more sustainable. Less dramatic but more grounding. Understanding this shift allows you to reinterpret the feeling of boredom. Instead of seeing it as absence, you begin to see it as unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity is not a problem. It is a transition. Here is Bloco 5M Texto Continuo para TTS. When you begin to understand this pattern, the story of your relationship starts to change. For a long time, losing interest in healthy partners may have felt confusing or even frustrating. You may have wondered if something was wrong with you, if you were incapable of long-term love, or if you were simply not meant for stable relationships. But the truth is much gentler than that. Your nervous system was never rejecting healthy love. It was reacting to unfamiliar calm. There was a time when emotional intensity helped you stay connected. Uncertainty made you pay attention. Emotional highs and lows made relationships feel important and meaningful. That pattern made sense in the emotional environments where it first developed. But adulthood gives you the chance to learn a different emotional language. A language where love does not have to feel urgent to be real. A language where calm does not mean boredom. A language where stability does not mean something is missing. This new language takes time for the nervous system to learn. Because calm feels quiet, and quiet does not immediately register as exciting. But quiet is where safety grows. Quiet is where trust builds. Quiet is where connection becomes sustainable instead of overwhelming. This is why healthy relationships often feel slower. They do not create emotional urgency. They do not dominate your thoughts. They do not demand constant attention. Instead, they create space. Space for work. Space for friendships. Space for hobbies. Space for rest. Space for life outside the relationship. At first, this space can feel strange. You may feel like you are not thinking about the person enough. Not missing them enough. Not feeling intense enough emotions. But this space is not distance. It is balance. For the first time, the relationship is not competing with the rest of your life for attention. It is integrating into it. Instead of emotional highs and lows, you begin to experience emotional steadiness. Instead of adrenaline, you experience comfort. Instead of anticipation, you experience presence. And presence feels different from excitement. Presence is quieter. Softer. Less dramatic. But it is also more stable and more sustainable. Over time, the nervous system begins to recognize this new emotional state as safe. The calm that once felt unfamiliar begins to feel grounding. The steadiness that once felt boring begins to feel reassuring. You may start noticing small changes. Conversations feel easier. Time together feels relaxing instead of stimulating. Silence feels comfortable instead of awkward. You begin to appreciate reliability. You begin to trust consistency. You begin to feel comfort in predictability. And slowly, the emotional definition of love expands. Love is no longer only excitement. It becomes safety. It becomes trust. It becomes presence. This does not mean passion disappears. It means passion no longer depends on uncertainty to exist. It grows from connection instead of instability. The part of you that once chased emotional intensity was trying to keep you connected. Now, the part of you that is learning to accept calm is trying to help you stay. Because staying requires a different kind of courage than chasing. And the realization that healthy love feels different, not boring, not empty, just unfamiliar, is often the moment the pattern begins to change. When you begin to understand this pattern, the story of your relationship starts to change in a very important way. For a long time, losing interest in healthy partners may have felt confusing, frustrating, or even shameful. You may have wondered if something was wrong with you, if you were incapable of long-term love, or if you were simply not meant for stable relationships. But the truth is much gentler than that. Your nervous system was never rejecting healthy love. It was reacting to unfamiliar calm. There was a time when emotional intensity helped you stay connected. Uncertainty made you pay attention. Emotional highs and lows made relationships feel important and meaningful. That pattern made sense in the emotional environments where it first developed. But adulthood offers the possibility of learning a different emotional language. A language where love does not have to feel urgent to be real. A language where calm does not mean boredom. A language where stability does not mean something is missing. This new language takes time for the nervous system to learn. Because calm feels quiet, and quiet does not immediately register as exciting. For a nervous system trained by emotional activation, excitement feels alive, while calm can initially feel neutral or even empty. But calm is where safety grows. Calm is where trust builds. Calm is where connection becomes sustainable instead of overwhelming. This is why healthy relationships often feel slower. They do not create emotional urgency. They do not dominate your thoughts every hour of the day. They do not demand constant reassurance. Instead, they create space. Space for work. Space for friendships. Space for hobbies. Space for rest. Space for life outside the relationship. At first, this space can feel strange. You may notice that you are not thinking about the person constantly. You are not checking your phone every few minutes. You are not replaying conversations late at night. You are not feeling the emotional roller coaster you once associated with romance. And because those feelings are missing, you may assume the love is missing too. But what is missing is not love. What is missing is emotional instability. Healthy relationships remove the uncertainty that once fueled emotional intensity. They remove the unpredictability that once created urgency. They remove the inconsistency that once triggered anticipation. Without those elements, your nervous system has to learn a new way to recognize connection. Instead of adrenaline, there is comfort. Instead of anticipation, there is reliability. Instead of urgency, there is presence. Presence feels different from excitement. Excitement pulls you forward. Presence allows you to stay. Excitement is intense but temporary. Presence is quiet but sustainable. Excitement consumes attention. Presence creates space. For many people, this shift is the moment where relationships begin to feel different in a lasting way. You begin to notice that time together feels relaxing instead of stimulating. Silence feels comfortable instead of awkward. Plans feel natural instead of urgent. You begin to appreciate reliability in ways you could not before. You begin to trust consistency instead of questioning it. You begin to feel comfort in predictability instead of restlessness. Slowly, the emotional definition of love expands. Love is no longer only excitement. Love becomes safety. Love becomes trust. Love becomes presence. And something else begins to happen quietly in the background. The craving for emotional chaos starts to fade. The need for uncertainty begins to soften. The nervous system starts recognizing calm as safe instead of unfamiliar. This change is gradual. It does not happen overnight. But over time, Calm stops feeling boring and starts feeling grounding. You may notice that you feel more relaxed in relationships, more emotionally stable, less anxious, less consumed by doubt. You may notice that connection feels easier to maintain, even when life becomes busy or stressful. This is the nervous system learning that love does not have to feel intense to be real. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: the part of you that once chased emotional intensity was trying to keep you connected. It was trying to ensure closeness, attention, and emotional engagement. Now, the part of you that is learning to accept calm is trying to help you stay. Because staying requires a different kind of courage than chasing.